Hi, welcome to Lesson 4 of the Full Stack Cloud Developer pre-course. In this lesson, we're going to learn how to send post data from our landing page to the server to save it in the database. The first step is to add JavaScript to our web page. Let's do that now. So we have our landing page and we've got a notify button and an email address for the users to enter. And then when they click notify, you'll notice that right now it's not going anywhere, it's just going into the address bar. And that's the default behavior. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at this. So let's go over to the network tab, and that's already cleared. So let's go ahead and start over from scratch at the root, and then we're going to see what happens. All right, so we've got a fresh page, and you'll notice that the URL is just straight root URL. And then we're going to go ahead and post our form again and see what happens. So now you can see that it tacked on the form parameters, email equals, and our test email address. So, and it did a GET request. So it didn't actually post anything to the server. It just tacked it on and then sent a request to the server like it did when we hit the web page. So now let's go ahead and do an inspect. Now we see a form. Now a form is what allows us to actually post input data in our form to the server. There's other ways to do this, but a form is the basic way of doing it. So let's go ahead and open up the code. We're going to open Visual Studio Code and we're going to navigate to our project. So I'll just hit open here. And then in VS Code, we're going to go ahead and open up the folder. And then under source, main, so this is a Java project. So we go into Java. Actually, we're going to go into resources because it's a static HTML page, and then we'll go to the Java section when we actually receive the email address request. So we're looking for a form. So there's the form right there that has the top, but there's two of them. So there's another one, and it's down below at the bottom of the page. So we've got a notify me, and we've got a sign up form. So we've got two forms on this page. So here's the notify me one, and down at the bottom is where the sign up form is. So we're going to want to see how we're going to submit this then. There's two of them. So we'll probably deal with one at a time. Let's do the first one first. We're going to set the action. Now the action is where it's going to send to the server. So what address is it sending to? So it's the domain / something. And that's where our server is going to listen for the data to come to it. So let's go ahead and clear this out again and just get back to the root request. All right, so now we've got an action of notify me. Now when we do the network post request, let's see what happens, or the network request, let's see what happens. So we get an error. It did go to notify me, which is good, but then it tacked on the email address again to the end. So default behavior 404 is what our server responded with because we don't have a notify me receiver yet. So we have to actually make one. So that's the error. So let's go ahead and let's see what we do next. So, and it was a GET request. So we actually want to send data over a post request. So let's go ahead and change our form, and we'll add the method, and we want the method to be post. Now there's different methods for sending a form. There's post, which is basically creating data or sending data down. And that's the one we're going to use here. Okay, now it's a post request. Let's see what happens. So let's clear it, and then let's send this request. Okay, now you notice that it didn't tack the parameters on. A post request sends a body to the server. It doesn't put it on the URL, the requesting URL. But it did go to notify me, and there's the form data. It's sending our email now in form data. So let's go ahead and take the next step. So we've got, let's clear it out. And we're going to go ahead and got our method. Post, and then we've got the form down below here. We're going to add some script. And so our script is going to actually help us post this form data. But first, let's just see that our script is actually even doing anything. So let's call a console log just to see if it works. We're just going to keep iterating. So this is an iterative method. You go ahead and add something, add the simplest thing you can to see that it's working, and in this case it'll be a console, and then we'll go ahead and start filling in more and adding to it, iteratively improving it. All right, so now we know that the console log works in our script, and notice we have jQuery up there, so let's go ahead and see how we can leverage jQuery. What we're going to want to do is see if the document is ready, so that way the elements have all been rendered and they're available to get our email address from. Notice how Visual Studio Code is actually helping us define the ready function, or the ready function for us there. And then so document.ready is jQuery thing, and then the function that we're going to use to process it, again, the simplest thing we can do, let's go ahead and do a console log to see that it's working. So when document's ready, let's see what happens there. And then let's see, notice how the ready is up above this. Let's see which one gets called first. This will be interesting. So let's go ahead and run this. Refresh the page, and you'll notice that the statement on the bottom actually printed before the other one. That's because the document wasn't ready yet. So when the script ran, the document wasn't ready. So now let's go ahead and add a form submit function. Okay, so now in our document ready, we're going to process our form. So this jQuery, getting it by the tag like this, is going to retrieve both forms, and however many are actually on here. So when any of these forms are submitted, so we've got an on submit, when any of them are submitted, this function is going to run. And again, the simplest thing we can do is a console log statement, so let's do that. Okay, let's see what this looks like when we run it. Don't need that anymore. We know what's going to happen. So let's go ahead and refresh our page and then submit this form. Okay, so we've got the 404 because we don't have the server-side receiver yet. And I didn't see that our console log came out. It might have flashed, but then the 404 took over. So let's go ahead and see what this is doing. Let's go back to the root, and let's try this again with a breakpoint now. Okay, so it is here. It's just that it's getting overwritten by the 404 when it comes back. Now 404 means document not found, or resource not found on the server. So we don't have one yet, so it's telling us that it's not found. So you see there the breakpoint's there, and then if we continue to run it, it gets replaced with the 404. All right, so let's go ahead. This is telling us now that we are sending something to the server, and our form is submitting, which is its default behavior. So grabbing the event and doing a prevent default will prevent the form from also submitting. So what we want to do is just have this function run, spit out the console log statement, and not actually submit to the server. So let's see what happens when we run this. All right, so we'll go back to the root and refresh our page. And when we submit this, we've got our prevent default, and we can just go ahead and clear that breakpoint and then run it through. And now we've got our form submitted and the page stayed, which is exactly what we want. We don't want the page to change. So that prevent default stopped the form from doing what it would normally do by default. Okay, so now what we're going to do is use JavaScript to post data to the server. So let's see what we do next. So we'll go ahead and just add a comment here. Then we're going to post the email address to the server instead of posting to a new page. And let's go ahead and do a search in a new tab. And we're going to look for the fetch API for JavaScript. And that's going to help us. I like MDN, the Mozilla Developer Network. They have really good documentation. So there's the fetch API. And let's go ahead and see, they have good examples too down below. And so there's a good description of what this is, and you can read about what the fetch API is and what it actually does. And so jQuery has an AJAX function, And we're going to go ahead and use the fetch API instead. So let's go ahead and find a good example that matches. So here's one where it's going to send a response, or send a request and then get a response. And then here's where we're supplying request options. There's a post method that's kind of looking like what we want. Let's go ahead and see if there's something down below that matches a little bit better. Uploading JSON data. That actually sounds pretty good. So let's go ahead and copy this one. So we're going to copy that and paste it into our function, and then we'll modify it. Okay, so let's get the input field values from the form, which is our email address. So let's go ahead and put in a comment, and we'll get that. Okay, so using jQuery, we could go ahead and set a variable, and let's call it form. So let's go ahead and grab our form. So $ is the alias for jQuery here, and then we're going to do the current target, which could be either of our forms, right? So current target will get us the form that actually got called here. And then let's go ahead and set a variable to the form field that is called email. So find takes a selector, so we can use an ID, a class, and let's go ahead and see what we have on this email field. On the form, that's the first one. So we've got a name. There it is right there, called email. And so let's go ahead and go down to the jQuery selector, and we can go ahead and capture that by name. So it's an input field, and then we're going to go ahead and do square brackets, and this is something we can search for. We'll learn more about jQuery later. So the name equals email. So we've got an input box that has a name equal to email, and then we're going to go ahead and get the value of it. And we're going to set that into the variable called email. And again, the simplest thing we can do here to see if it's working is we'll do a console log, and we'll send out, or we'll put the email in the log and see if this is actually working. So let's go to our page, we'll refresh it, and let's go ahead and enter our email and then hit notify me. We still have our breakpoint. Let's just go ahead and run that through, and then there's our form. Email's not defined, but our form is, and you can see length 1, so we got one form. And there's our console log statement, and there's our email, and it's going to print out right here in our console, so we know that that's working. So now let's go ahead and iterate a little bit more and add to this. So here's where we're going to send the data to the server using the fetch API. So let's go ahead and go back to MDN after we add a comment. So now send the email as JSON data to the server. Okay, let's go back to MDN, which we have, and we're going to go ahead and copy this. And that's kind of what we want there, so data, username. And one of the things to do when you're learning is don't just copy and paste. Let's just go ahead and type it out, because then we'll build muscle memory, and we're also learning, because copy and paste has a lot of statements in there that we wouldn't even remember that we pasted in. But by typing it straight out, we're going to learn, and we're going to build muscle memory on JavaScript and these functions. So here's the fetch API. So we're going to type fetch, and then it takes the URL. And the URL is where we're actually sending this. So form, and form has an attribute, and we're going to grab the action, which is the server side that's going to retrieve this. So notify me is what is on our form, and we'll go verify that. Okay, we want the method to be a post, just like it says in their documentation, and we're going to type it out. And you can use single quotes or double quotes in JavaScript. I prefer single quotes as much as possible, especially for things that don't change. Double quotes for things that may change. All right, so headers. We're going to actually tell the server that we're sending it JSON data as the content type. So we're going to type out the header content type, and then we're going to make it say application/JSON. So that way the server knows what the format of the data is that we're sending. Okay, and then next we're going to go ahead and build the body for our request. So the body, and then we're going to go ahead and use a JavaScript function called JSON_stringify, which is going to take the data up above with our email and turn it into a string, and that's going to become our post body. Let's correct the indentation here. That looks funny. All right, and then next, the server's going to send us a response, and we're going to get the response as JSON. So let's go ahead and add a promise receiver on here. So the fetch is going to return with this function on the then. So we'll go ahead and put then. And you'll notice I keep referring back. You're not expected to remember all this by memory. I never do. Okay, so we're going to call the response function JSON, which is going to return us the data. And then with that data, let's do the simplest thing that we can and see what it looks like in the console. So there's a function definition for data. It's going to pass data over to here. So we're going to go ahead and do console log and data, and we're going to spit out what the data is into the console and see what it does. Oh, first we have to do a catch, just in case something goes wrong. We want to catch the error. So you can see that down below, and then we're just going to go ahead and log that to the console as well. So console.error, and then we'll go ahead and put in what we want the message to be. Because if an error happens, we wouldn't actually see it unless we're debugging. So let's go ahead and see what this does. So there's where we're going to get our response, and then if an error occurs, we're going to come down here. Oh, and that was a comma, not a semicolon. That was a mistake. That's why it was nicely that the VS Code highlighted the problem with the little squiggly line. All right, so let's go ahead and refresh our page. And let's post this data and see what happens. Okay, so we get an error response 404, not found, which is good. And so the server said that it's not there. It doesn't know what notify me is. In our next lesson, we're going to go ahead and start filling out the notify me function. See you there.